Hello, Mr. Yassine. How are you?
Hey, what's up?
Same old. So I believe it was Mr. Hazard from my Discord was like, "Hey, Yassine's a cool dude, and you guys would get along, so you guys should go chat." And then just by DMing and looking at each other's bios, I think you recognize that we both have some background in law or law enforcement, and we pretty much knew that it was going to be a good conversation. And Yassine, would you mind introducing yourself to the folks at home and telling them a little bit about yourself?
Okay. First of all, I think maybe I'll unbutton a little bit.
Yeah, you got to get
Connor,
that
is this
sex appeal.
okay, or do you want more of this?
I don't know how
So,
sexy we're getting tonight, so we'll see.
well, it's your platform, and I want to be respectful of the rules that you set. Uh,
I use
so
very harsh profanity, so I'll try to be on my best behavior tonight.
I'm so going off of that. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I use terrible profanity all the time. Uh,
Beautiful.
hi, hi everyone. I'm Yassine Maskhot. Good luck pronouncing my last name. I picked it specifically to trip people up. I'm a public defender. I write for Jesse Single and professional instigators when I put get into all sorts of antics. That's a good place to start.
Well, I was okay. So now we're already coming into it a little aggressive because when you said like you're an assistant state attorney, I was like, oh, maybe he's a prosecutor, and you're like, oh no, I'm a
No, not
defender, and it's
no.
like, oh no, now we're like, oh, boom, because cops and defense attorneys don't necessarily get along, but it's not. It's not because I don't think we'll probably admit to each other the flaws in the system. But I'll actually share with you my experience because what I try to do is only push cases that I knew were like slam dunks. You know what I'm saying? Like I had the evidence, the person was there, they did it, whatever. And like 99% of the time, it got pled out before it ever got to court. Basically because of the
Well, that's
nature.
intentional. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's how the system is supposed to run. How long were you a cop?
4 years.
Okay. What would you say is like the most uh, the most common thing that people get wrong about police work that you have to disprove or disavow or correct?
Uh, I I think the main thing in our current political climate is that like cops wake up intentionally thinking that like, oh, I want to fuck somebody over today.
Hmm.
I think like a lot of cops. So I think it's like 30, 30, 30. 30% of cops or 33% of cops are shitbags who just want to collect a check and they don't want to do any work whatsoever. And if that means that they can ignore you committing a crime, they'll ignore you committing a crime. And then another 30% of cops are mediocre to average. If they see you doing something shady, they'll do what they need to do in order to get the job done, but they're not superheroes. And then I would say there's another 30% or 33%, whoever's left, who, depending on who they are as individuals, they're either superheroes or assholes. And what I mean by that is like they're the best dudes in the world that you want with you in a firefight. Sometimes they run into burning buildings in order to save kids, and they get into firefights with really bad bangers and this, that, the other. But within that 33% is also assholes that will basically walk up to drug addicts and say like, "Hey, buddy, can I search you?" And by the time they say, "Hey, can I search you?" their hands are already in the pockets fishing for stuff. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of been my experience where I can't separate the good and the bad because it's all jumbled together in a giant mess.
Right. What? Maybe the answer is obvious, but why would you assume that defense attorneys are, I guess, in opposition to police officers?
Well, oh man, I'm gonna be so rude to my former profession. So cops are a lot of them are dumb. so, I love my former cops. I love my former profession. But I would talk to state attorneys when I would go down to for like a deposition or whatever, and they'd be like, "Man, you should see some of the reports we get. We were just happy that this was written in English and understandable because some of the shit we get is written in fucking crayon, and and sometimes it's just that bad. Like the descriptions are off, the narrative sucks, the evidence sucks, like all that kind of stuff. Um, so that's part of I think a prosecutor's frustration with a for with like cops are. And then I think from a defense attorney, this is me projecting, but I think from a defense attorney's perspective, cops will say what's necessary to get the conviction, regardless of whether or not that is actually what happened. And also, some cops have a victim complex where everything is 30% more exciting and dangerous than it actually was because they want to build the drama into the moment, when really realistically what they did is they arrested a meth addict for shoplifting.
Mm-hmm. So when I go to one of the things I guess your audience should know is I'm a big proponent of gun rights, and I carry a gun. When I go to court, I bring my gun with me, and they allow you to check it in while you're doing whatever in the building. So I got to know the law enforcement officers that deal with courthouse security pretty well over the years. And I remember one of them joking, saying, "Oh, you're a defense attorney. I hope that we can get along." And that struck me as, I guess, like somewhat odd or surprising that the officer would immediately assume that we were in opposition. And I'm not playing for like a kumbaya moment here. One of the shifts that I noticed after doing criminal defense work is that I started with my opinion of law enforcement fairly critical, but critical from a libertarian standpoint. I'm a big fan of Radley Balco. He's been a big inspiration for me in terms of highlighting the deficiencies in the criminal justice system. So when I started, I had a very low opinion of cops. The thing that changed for me was seeing hours and hours and hours of really fucking boring video footage where nothing happens. It's my client is being a complete dipshit. And the cop is doing literally all they can to de-escalate the situation. There's obviously there's like a selection bias effect. Whenever something goes viral, it's only because it's out of the ordinary. And so a large portion of the population never ever will ever encounter police officers, especially not in an antagonistic framework. They go to work, they go home, they go to the grocery store. They never deal with cops. And so the one time that police interaction does come to their attention is when there's something extremely egregious. And I'm not here to like defend that. There's some seriously heinous shit. But that does tilt the overall perspective, because I'm the one, like second to an actual police officer, I'm the one that has to sit through and watch 13 hours of body cam footage.
They should
like
really
a
chop
shot.
it up for you. The fact that they're not is kind of rude. Like,
Well, they're not supposed to, because they're supposed to give me all the discovery. I'm entitled to all the evidence against my client, and it's my job to sift through that shit and find like whatever's relevant. And most of the time, just nothing happens. And most of the time, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I wouldn't be bothering with half that shit because and like I'm saying, even if I was an attorney, because the basically I know you're entitled to the entire discovery, but I don't know how your system is different than our system. But ours actually has like a case log where you activate the camera and then you can assign a case. And it was our job to like assign the case for, you know, whatever thing specifically to the video cam stuff. And if there wasn't body camera footage, or if it wasn't properly cited, there were questions, like to the point that like it basically was, if you don't have camera footage, we're now eyeballing you. Like, are you a shady motherfucker trying to cover some shit up, or was this legitimately like a technical issue? But my point being there, like 13 hours, I mean, this is something I always talk about, the hardcore stuff whenever I talk about my law enforcement experience. But when you boil down my hardcore stuff of me actually doing things, 2 hours, maybe.
Yeah, and when I say 13 hours, it's not just from one officer.
Oh,
so,
okay,
like if I have a stabbing, that's probably like the highest
scene, and they all have
right.
like 1 hour, and you have to watch the 1 hour to see if the angles line up to see whether or not it actually makes sense for your guy. Yeah, okay, I got you.
Yeah, and most of the time it's duplicative. Like it's redundant. There's no need to actually watch all of it. But that, I think that underscores, I guess, what my job is, because people assume that my job is to get people acquitted, find them not guilty. But it's not. I'm really part of the system. I'm the part that gives it legitimacy. Because when someone gets convicted, they'll say, "What the fuck are you complaining about? We gave you a competent attorney to protect your rights." shut the fuck up.
Yeah, so
And
you
that was
actually have to try to be a competent attorney. Yeah.
right, and that was that was the first thing that I wrote for Jesse Single's newsletter. It's called 11 Magic Words, where I highlight how useless I am, because for the vast majority of cases, and this is not necessarily a credit to police officers, but for the vast majority of cases, the evidence is a slam dunk. It's not even close. Like my client did the thing that they're accused of doing. And when I meet with my clients, I'm just kind of like shrugging a lot. I'm like, what do you want me to do? You just stabbed someone in broad daylight around like 6 different
There's
cameras.
3 or 4 witnesses. There's affidavits.
Right.
There's there's body cameras. Like all that kind of stuff. And that's the
Yeah.
I guess that's like the main thing that's like frustrating for me. So, I appreciate your perspective, and actually that this is like really cathartic for me, because I feel like a lot of people in the public, they believe that like I was kind of saying, cops wake up to fuck people over. So we're just looking for some guy to pin, to grab like a murder knife that we stole off of a different crime scene and throw it in their pocket and put him in jail for 20 fucking years. And I'm not going to say that shit doesn't happen. We're a country of 320 million people. Like, shit can happen. But the chances of that happening are super rare. Most cops are normal dudes who are just trying to do their job. And then what I would also say is, like, kind of like you're saying, the pay to play ratio, the amount of bullshit versus the amount of real stuff, is like 95-5. Like the amount of, I don't know. My experience as a cop was literally the amount of shootings, stabbings, murders, armed burglaries, foot chases, and all that kind of stuff. If you took all of that down, it would be 2 hours of action for me. But because I was patrolling constantly and I didn't have the leisure of choosing when something crazy happened, I had to be on my guard all the time. And then when something crazy finally did happen, I had to, go handle it as best I could. So that is one of the things about the public that they don't realize about the job. But I'll tell you where the maybe the hesitancy or the potential hostility came from when we first started this conversation. It's just from this moment, and maybe you could explain it actually. I had a woman who was her ex was a fucking shitbag. 40 years old, 50 years old. He'd been on cocaine his entire life. Basically major dealer. Been in and out of the system over and over again. Aggravated battery, robbery, all this kind of shit. And she broke up with him. And she stepped out of her apartment in order to have a cigarette and talk on the phone. And he, according to her, I wasn't there, right? But according to her, she grabbed her by the hair, dragged her back into the apartment, beat her, and as she was falling to the ground, she landed on top of her 2-year-old, her 2-year-old was a pillow underneath her head, while this dude is just like smashing her face. And then basically we get called, we get there, and the dude takes off. We don't catch him that night. But she has like quarter sized and silver dollar sized welts on the top of her head that are maybe like an eighth of an inch to a half inch out of her head. And this is like one of the worst fucking beatings that I've seen. And the state attorney, because I wrote that, I was like, these look like some pretty serious injuries. And she was like, she fought me on the technicality of serious injury, and she's like, "Are you a doctor? Do you know what a serious injury is? Do you know?"
But that's common for DV situations.
Right. Yeah, and like I understood her grilling me, but at the same time, she was like, "Well, what is?" I think she was hoping that I would just like trip up and like mealy mouth it, and I would just be like a scared 80 IQ cop. But I was like, well, she had about like a half dozen dots that I documented in photographs that were all silver dollar to quarter sized on her face, welts that were probably a half inch to quarter inch raised off of her skull. And we also found blood on the shirt of her toddler that she landed on top of, and we collected that for evidence and this, that, the other. And so at the end of the day, like she backed off. But for me, I was taking it a little personal, like fuck you. But that's because it's personal to me, because I had to deal with this lady after she got her ass kicked.
Mm-hmm. So I want to make it clear that cops fuck up. They oppress people's rights. They violate people's rights. They do some shady shit. I'm not disavowing that. I just want to contextualize it that the vast majority, based on my experience of reviewing tons of footage, is really fucking boring and uneventful. And you know, I see,
Go
and
on.
and also you have to consider that it gets filtered. I only see things when there's a charge filed. I don't see it if nothing happens. But you know, when there's a call for like a stabbing, I see police officers
shit.
rush
Sorry,
to
my
a
camera
scene.
went down, but I'll be right back.
Okay. Should I keep talking or wait?
Keep talking. I can hear you.
All right. So when I see officers respond to a stabbing, I see the immediacy in their actions, and I see what to me appears earnest attempt to help people. Like they're trained in first aid. They actually want to help whatever the victim is. So I don't deny that that exists. The when it comes to, so I just want to make sure that that doesn't mean that cops are always innocent. Uh, when you're talking about domestic violence, this is a common problem with prosecuting any DV case. And if you want to get into the technicality of it, Crawford and Davis are two Supreme Court cases that completely changed the domestic violence litigation. They required under the confrontation clause, they required the victims to be present. And previously, like before these decisions, prosecutors could just kind of like proceed in absentia. They can proceed without the victim's cooperation. But after that, that changed. So a common tactic for me as a defense attorney, whenever I get a DV case, is just hope and pray that the victim does not want to cooperate. Because if they can't bring that person into the courtroom, there is no case. Like that violates the confrontation clause of the Constitution.
Ooh,
And
yes. Sorry, go
DV
ahead.
cases are the most common in terms of victim reluctance. Like that is just like part of the part and parcel of the whole phenomenon. This is where you get like kind of like the most kind of zealous advocates are not really the defense attorneys, it's the victims. When they try to excuse like the shitbag's behavior.
Well, and I gotta say, so that's actually one of the frustrating things. See this and talk. So that's one of the things that was frustrating from a law enforcement perspective too, because oftentimes we would have these like little drug units, basically, like half a dozen to a dozen guys who were, dealing drugs, running in the community. Maybe one or two of them are actually beating people or killing people or whatever. But they're all working in concert to each other's benefit, so we kind of treat them as like a solitary gang. But drug possession charges, at least in the state of Florida, were really hamstrung. Like we can go for possession, and we can basically get the people who are buying, and then the narcos, the drug cops, they can work long term investigations where they do hand to hands, but that takes like 6 months to a year in order to go after a drug organization because you're literally like finding informants in the community, getting them to wear a wire or a body or like a pink camera, then buying drugs from people and then building a case that way. It's super slow, takes forever for the charges to come back. And then, but in the meantime, these guys are just wrecking havoc. They're dealing drugs, they're getting into fights, they're shooting, they're stabbing, they're doing, reprisal attacks, this, that, the other. And where I'm going with this is oftentimes the reason or the way we got people into jail or prison for extended periods of time had nothing to fucking do with drugs. It was violence. It was domestic violence, or it was burglary or possession of burglary tools after previous attempts, and it was them stacking up points and this, that, the other. So what another exterior public perception that really frustrates the shit out of me is that like the justice system is just so weighted against the common citizen. Whereas for me, at least from a law enforcement perspective, it felt like the system was doing everything it fucking could to keep people out of bars, barring having lots of bullshit low-level offenses that you could go to jail for.
So first of all, would I be able to get access to the chat just so I can see if people are saying anything?
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
joined the server.
No,
Well, I don't
please.
think I have privileges on your server.
Well, if you're talking about on the server, the best way to do it is actually just to go to YouTube, type in Counterpoints. You can see the YouTube chat,
Okay.
or you can go to Twitch.
Okay.
And
So what you
Twitch,
described,
I'm smaller on. YouTube, I'm bigger on.
all right. But I mean, what you described, first of all, what's your position on drug legalization?
Pretty much. All right. So this is where I'm at. Weed, recreational, should be recreational yesterday. Then I would say cocaine, heroin, all that kind of stuff. I would decriminalize for possession, and then I would still prosecute trafficking and violence related to trafficking.
Okay. So that still leaves enough, or like at least enough leeway. So I won't say exactly what state I practice in, but I'm in the Pacific Northwest. One of the shifts that happened in my area is that prosecutors basically gave up on
On the drug war?
prosecute. Yeah, because
How's
of
that
jury
going?
nullification. I mean, it depends what your goals are, right?
Yeah.
If you see incarceration as a solution to drug use, then it's going badly. But it was in response to the public. The public was just fed up. The jury pool was fed up because prosecutors would spend tens of thousands of dollars on an immaculate drug bust, and the jury would be like, "Yeah, we don't give a fuck, not guilty." And there's nothing they can do about that. There's literally
Yo,
nothing that the
I
system
would
can do about that.
lose it. I would lose it. Well, so, but that's good that it's popular
But
will,
that's
I
part of the
guess.
jury system. That's
Yeah.
part of the jury system. It happened a lot in Washington D.C. as well. I don't know if you want me to explain what jury nullification is,
Well,
but
it's
the
basically
jury,
where they just abstain to render a verdict.
yeah, it's the reason why is because jurors cannot be held liable for anything they do as jurors, so they can do whatever the fuck they want and just
Including
say not
dismissing a
guilty.
case that's slam dunk. Yeah.
Right, and this can go from, I mean, from like a morality perspective, it can go both ways. Like it can get someone acquitted for bullshit offenses, but it also got the murderers of Emmett Till acquitted because it was an
Right.
all-white jury that just said, yeah, whatever, it's just a black guy
Right.
that was killed. We don't care. So it can go both ways in terms of who it benefits. But the prosecutors just kept wasting money prosecuting drug cases, and the jury was just like, this is stupid, this is just dumb, we are not going to convict someone over this petty bullshit, and they kept acquitting. So over time they would have these internal standards where the prosecutor would have to, it would be like 3.1 grams of meth before they spring it on you, but
Which they
besides that it's like
should.
whatever.
Yeah,
What do you mean by should?
Well, so for instance, like there was this guy, um, there was this guy, Irvin. I won't do his last name, but Irvin was the friendliest crackhead you ever met, and he just hung out in the neighborhood, smoked his crack, didn't bother anybody, begged enough money in order to be able to get his drug fix, and then the weirdest thing he would do would be walk around the downtown area and pressure wash the post office in the middle of the night, literally like 2 or 3 in the morning. He'd be at the post office, just pressure washing the algae off of the sidewalk, and you're just like, oh shit.
Where did he get a pressure washer from?
Literally, they left it out, so he was using it to clean the fucking post office, and I was like, fuck it, he's doing something with his high. That's great. And so fucking Irv, he didn't burglarize, he didn't steal, he didn't get into fights. He was the nicest fucking guy ever. And yet people would still fuck with him. Cops would still fuck with him. They would stick their hands in his pockets, find some drugs, take him to jail, do some trespassing charges, this, that, the other. And it was such a waste of the court's time and energy, and such a waste of law enforcement resources, because there's no fucking reason for him to go to the jail, because basically he's indigent. He doesn't have any money. He'll be back out the next day or the day after, and then he's going to walk his ass back to the city. So there's no fucking point. You're wasting everybody's time. But some cops chose to do that anyways. And so, for instance, with Irvin, I don't think you should prosecute. The only people that I think you should prosecute, I wouldn't even say that you should prosecute for low-level possession. You should prosecute for correlated crimes, like the property crimes for theft, in order to get the money to buy the drugs. That's kind of where I would be at.
But what you described was pretextual. You would try to nail drug dealers on unrelated collateral charges as a way of targeting their drug enterprise.
Only because that's the only way we could. So,
but that doesn't change the fact that it's pretextual.
Well, you're gonna have to dumb it down for cop brain. So, but okay, so my ideal law enforcement system would actually be take all the time, energy, money, and resources that we're wasting on possession for the drug war. Take all that stuff and then redirect it into the communities, obviously, but also redirect it into long-term criminal investigations. And instead of trying to do like nailing this, possession for Irvin Nesmith or whatever, target the long-term violent gangs and exclusively go after them with long-term deep operations. And you could get funding for one from the other.
Do you honestly see any progress being made using that front, given the state of the drug war and how long it's had? Someone's sneaking up on you, by the way.
It's a dog. Luckily, it's not a human being. It's not any of my previous arrests, coming back for me.
One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that after a jury trial, we get to talk to the jurors only if they want to. They're released from duty. They can talk about whatever case they want, about whatever details they want. But the judge implores them. It's like, it's really helpful if you stay and give feedback to the attorneys. They really appreciate the feedback, and that's always my favorite part of a jury trial is to get the feedback. And it tends to turn into like a freewheeling conversation about the criminal justice system. And one of the last trials that I had, I started talking about how I would personally deal with property crimes, because literally every single property crime case that I ever get, shoplifting, burglary, anything like that, there's always a drug component to it.
Yep.
It's how people feed their habit, and it's, from like an economics perspective, it's extremely inefficient. You break into a car, for example, that's immediately $300. Or I'm just talking about like what the cost is. It's like $300 in repairs. There might not even be anything there. Like the owner would be like, "Can you just like take $50 and leave my car alone?" And that would be like a more efficient way of doing it. So a large part of the property crimes are just driven by trying to feed the habit. And I was telling these jurors the way I would address property crime is just to make drugs free and hand them out to people. And the prosecutor just looked at me like I was fucking insane. Like,
listen, bro, I'm in the Pacific Northwest. What do you want?
well, I think it's an actionable policy, because that's the main primary driver of property crime. It's people needing money to feed their heroin habit and doing it in very destructive and inefficient ways to do it.
Well, so for instance, for me, this might be destructive and inefficient, but I would keep property crimes on the books, and basically all the money that I get from releasing half of the drug war, I would channel into actually prosecuting property crimes. I understand this might be a game of whack-a-mole for you, but the thing about it for me is it's not the drug use that's the problem. It's all the externalities. It's the impacted families. It's the degradation of somebody's health. It's the degradation of their ability to interact with the community, all that kind of stuff. And then also it's the degradation of the community when it comes to basically your experience as a citizen, like going down to the store. Are you going to be harassed by people who are panhandling? Are you going to be harassed by people who are shopping? Are you going to see people who are just stealing things en masse from the store that you're going to pay money for? Are businesses closing because there's like mass shoplifting? I know it's an exaggerated story, but do you see like CVS's and Walgreens literally drying up? Do you see chains and mom and pop stores disappearing in communities because they can't deal with the degradation in life? And for me, that's where some of these things that I would say more passive people are about crime, I'm not as passive. I think you should hammer property crime. I think you should hammer these things. But what you're doing, for instance, you're saying there's like drug stuff. It's like, hey, we'll pay for your rehab the first time. Get your shit together. Hey,
well, that's also assuming that rehab works and is effective. What you described is not incompatible with a policy that just gives drugs away. So, for example, I mean, one day I was walking to the gym. It was a 4-block walk. I passed by 20 cars. Literally every single one had their window smashed with like debris on the sidewalk. There's no amount of law enforcement funding that would prevent that. You can't have a cop at every corner at preventing this sort of thing. This is a highly opportunistic crime. But if you get rid of the demand, which is the demand to steal shit, to buy heroin or whatever, that would have an impact on tempering it down. So you have to think about what is the most effective way of achieving your goal.
Well, and then this is the other question about it. But so, for instance, like the Swiss model, some people talk shit about the Swiss model. But what they do is they do actually have treatment clinics where people can shoot up or whatever or do whatever. But it's all medicinal. It's all like they wean you off, and then it's subsistence doses. So it's literally exactly enough in order to stave off the craving, stave off the motivation, stave off all that kind of stuff. And then they try to meet the person at that house at that halfway house or injection site, and basically give them the social services so they can try to get their life back on track. And
Mhm.
so for me, I'm okay with that. That's way better than sticking somebody in a cage and then having them be out, 48 hours later. My only problem though is maybe it's my conservative instinct. Um, fuck, man. If I saw a city with uh or if I was on a city block and there was like smashed out cars and there was 10 cars in a row, dude, I'd fucking move, or I'd be fucking crying for basically people to get their heads smashed in. Like worse, worse policing. Like bring it on. Like bring on the fucking war on drugs. Bring on the fucking
That doesn't solve the
the
problem. It's retribution. It doesn't
eh.
actually address the issue, right? I mean, but at least you can be honest about it.
Well, I think so. So, for instance, like I think that what the broken windows policy that New York did, what it did was it pushed the crime elsewhere because people didn't like the people who were panhandling, the people who were trespassing, the people who were using drugs on the street, the people who were doing property crimes, the people who were vandalizing. They didn't want to get locked up over bullshit over and over and over and over again. So they were like, "Fuck this, we're out. We're going to go to someplace that's easier." So it didn't solve crime; it just pushed it into poorer areas. I'll agree with that, but then I don't know how you what you're talking about feels like a Sisyphean task. You're pushing the boulder up the fucking hill over and over and over again, and I don't know what kind of result you could expect out of. Hey, you need weed, we got you. You need alcohol, we got you. You need heroin, we got you. You need coke, we got you. Like I don't know how that plays out.
So this type of analysis, I think, is often used as a circle jerk as a way to avoid the issue by saying, "Oh, we need to talk about the root causes of crime." I don't think it's very simple that often, but for something like property crime, we know why people are stealing. It's because they need money for heroin. I had a friend that
But do
was
you?
homeless for 7 years.
Mhm.
He eventually got clean and then started using again. And he told me, I asked him, like, how much do you spend on heroin in a given day? And he said about $100. And I thought that was such an unconscionable amount that I just didn't believe him. I looked up some studies and they confirmed him. It's like $60 to $100 just on heroin alone. So if you take the high end, that's $30,000, about $30,000 a year, just on heroin. Like forget rent, forget food, forget whatever.
Mhm.
That's a shit ton of stuff that people need to steal. And I asked him how was he able to raise this amount of money, and he said, "I was just boosting shit." He would
Mhm.
his favorite things were to steal textbooks. They retain their value really well,
Nice.
and video games from Target. So there's this entire underground economy of people that are stealing things that try to convert it to cash so that they can buy heroin, and it's highly inefficient. For economists, they call it deadweight loss. It's
Well,
not an efficient enterprise because there's a lot of waste that goes through it. So just from that standpoint, like the people are motivated to do property crime to feed their drug habit, I think there's a clear link between why they do why they crime, and how we can address it.
so I have a question that I want you to address, and then I want to address it a little bit more macroscopically. So let me ask you the question first, because this is something that I think you would deal with in economics. Like, how are you not just creating a perverse incentive where somebody could be like, oh yeah, fuck yeah, I could get hooked on heroin. Who gives a fuck? The state's going to give me heroin. And then, basically, if the state has dog shit heroin, or if they're not getting their fix, then all you did, and then also you're talking about the health outcomes, you're talking about the family outcomes, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, sure, you solved property crime and all that kind of stuff, but then you also just accepted the health and family outcomes that are related to addiction.
Yeah, those are fair questions. So the first one, that's a reasonable criticism. You have to ask yourself how many people are not trying heroin just because of the cost, and it's not. It's like, for example,
I'm
you're not using heroin because it's $10 like a pop or whatever? Would you try
uh,
it at $5? Probably not. Like I have no interest in heroin. I've seen like what it does to my clients. And there's like some research that look into how probable you are to be addicted from using just like once. There's a neurologist, I think, in NYU that has done this extensive studies on this topic. So I'll just defer to his expertise. But
mhm.
from that standpoint, I don't foresee a significant amount of people are dissuaded from trying heroin just because of the price. They're not going to be like, oh shit, the government's giving it. Maybe I'll give it a shot. I don't think that's necessarily the tipping point. So
Okay.
that's the first answer.
Mm-hmm.
I'll in terms of dog shit heroin, no, you get dog shit heroin now when it's sold in the street. When some like drug dealer pulls it out of his back pocket, be like, yeah, this is heroin. It might be mixed in with some laxatives or baking soda, but it's heroin. You can make heroin very, very, very cheap, especially when you have like a government enterprise that is the one that is manufacturing it.
Oh man, you're blackpilling the fuck out of me. So the I think this was probably the most black pill thing that I realized while I was doing law enforcement when I realized the nature of the perpetual motion machine was that what we're really doing. You're trying to come up with these solutions because you see your clients, you see how they suffer, you see how the community suffers, you see the negative externalities, you want to fix it. But I am kind of convinced that we don't actually want to fix it because it's too complex and it costs too much money. And what we can do instead is we can let these problems burn themselves out. And what I mean by that is literally these people go get dog shit stepped on heroin. It's cut with fentanyl. It kills, half a dozen to a dozen people. They're off the street. The dealers, basically either lose part of their client base or they get arrested or whatever. They're in and out of the system, blah, blah, blah. One or two cops get killed in the city every single year, but that's a price we're willing to pay. I think that's like literally just how American cities are. And they don't care if poor, desperate people kill themselves with drugs. They don't care if poor, desperate people live in communities that are dog shit. They don't care if cops have to risk their lives in order to enforce these laws or enforce the status quo, as long as all the dog shit stays on the wrong side of the tracks. And that's kind of where
You have to
I think
assume
America
a
is.
surgical. Right. I agree with you in terms of what the conditions are, but you also have to assume that there's a surgical precision to where the dog shit lands. You have to assume that it only affects people that no one gives a shit about, and that's not true.
Well,
Uh,
you're right. It just disproportionately affects people that nobody gives a
yes,
shit about.
yeah, that I can see that that's true.
Yeah.
But for it to be, I guess, a viable, sustainable model,
Mhm.
setting aside its morality, you have
Yeah.
to
Don't think about the morality for too long.
you have to assume that there's some precision to who it affects. The second part is this goes back to retribution.
I'm still
When I
listening.
talk about okay, when it comes to retribution, that's a prime motivator for the United States criminal justice system. It's a sense of not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a sense of giving up, where it's just like we don't care about rehabilitating people. We don't necessarily care about dissuading people. We just want these motherfuckers to hurt. And
To pay for their sins.
right.
It's very Christian.
And I would say that motivates a significant portion of legislation, not just drug policy, but sex offenders and how they're treated. Their sex offenders are, setting aside the heinousness of their crimes, they're by far the people that are treated the worst by society.
Oh yeah, they
They're
can only
chronically
be
homeless.
Yep.
Right.
Only homeless, living camps, chronically using this underground economy in order to survive because that's the only way they can survive. And then end up killing each other, hurting each other, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, no, it's absolutely fucking brutal the way some of these people live. And the only reason why maybe I'm as cruel as I am is because I've done some of the things that they've done. Like I've camped for extended periods of time. I've hiked. I've lived out in the woods, all that kind of stuff, and it fucking sucks. But you can survive. And then I think you're right that I am playing into the retributive. I'm just saying it out loud. Everybody else just lets it happen in the background. I'm saying maybe on some level I'm okay with it.
That's fine. That's at least honest. I think it's also important to acknowledge that there's a trade-off. If you want to pursue retribution, it's going to come at the expense of other goals that you could potentially achieve through the criminal justice system that you're foregoing.
Well, and I wanted to zoom out so I don't seem like a total monster. The macroscopic picture, I literally think like 90% of the world's illegal opium trade comes from the state of Afghanistan, and is then processed in other countries and then trafficked around the world. I want to say a majority of the world's cocaine comes from South and Central America, and that's kind of the hub for production. So what I would do if I was the United States government and I was in charge of a, $65 trillion international global community, I would say, hey, cartels, you're more powerful than your governments. You come in on the inside, you produce this much amount per year. We will synthesize it for legal and medicinal and drug rehabilitative purposes. And it is your job as the cartel who controls a certain amount of, you know, territory and who is receiving billions of dollars every year. It is your job to control the drug production within your territory. If somebody tries to produce drugs outside of yourself, you fucking kill them or you push them out. Okay. And
So you
then
want to formalize cartels
I
and their
do.
monopoly hold?
I
Okay.
do. And then I want to bring them into the fold. I want to pseudo legalize them. And then I would want to use their crop. For instance, like opioids, you can synthesize opioids into plenty of productive painkillers. And then when it comes to cocaine, I don't know of any, like, I know you can use it for like a local anesthetic. I don't know if we really need all the cocaine of Central and South America in order to create the world supply of local anesthetic. But you could produce all the local anesthetic, and then if you have leftover shit, literally pay them a few $1 billion and then fucking burn it. I don't give a shit. And then use the drugs that are synthesized, one, high quality, to basically use those for education and rehabilitation programs, kind of like the Swiss or Portuguese model, where you're saying, we'll meet you where you're at. You're addicted to drugs. You're buying them from the black market. We will get you something that will stave off your cravings and all that kind of stuff. We'll meet you with social services. If you want to get off of drugs, we'll help you. And that's kind of like my. I also want to invade South and Central America and create like a Pan American empire. So, I know that might not be
Are we
up
talking
there.
about Minecraft or real life?
In real life. I'm coming to invade Central America. In Minecraft? No, in real life.
So to bring it back to the
I love Senpai, man. I don't know if you're a fan or not. He could be a piece of shit, but that fucking meme was 10 out of 10.
no, yeah, I appreciate him as a performance artist, definitely.
Yeah.
To bring it back to the economics theme, what you described as a variant of something called the Coase theorem. It's when you contract away a negative externality. But what you proposed would only be viable to the extent that cartels remain to continue to exist, and they only exist because the production is illegal. Like you don't have a cartel on like fucking smart chips or whatever. You may have it on rare earth minerals with clandestine mining in the Congo, but you don't have it in legal, legitimized businesses, or at least to the extent that it's legal and legitimized, it's reduced. The cartel's influence is reduced. So you're proposing a way of producing things legally as a way to, I guess, shackle the cartel violence, right?
Well, and I was sorry. I want to make sure my internet's hooked up properly. God, I'm such a fucking techno boomer. So that my stream just went red for a second. So they're probably buffering. But but I do think that there's parallels in the American economy for basically like oligopolies and monopolies, like the tech industry, microchip manufacturing, all these like high-end things. I understand like agriculture is a little bit easier to get into the black market. The barrier to entry is lower. For marijuana, all you need is some good fertilizer in the proper environment. For cocaine, you probably just need some good fertilizer in the proper environment. For heroin, same thing. So I understand that these things would be difficult to police, but I also don't think they're impossible. And I think we have market models that currently exist. For instance, like the American agriculture industry is not a bunch of, small one-family farmers. It's a bunch of megacorps, and then it's super large family farms that are under government regulation that are trying to compete in order to stay viable. And then it's the same
crucial
thing.
point is that they're not murdering their competitors. That's
As
the
far
crucial
as we
point
know.
there.
I mean, I did watch Yellowstone, but like the point being that as far as we know, it's not Central and South America level of drug homicides.
Right. So doesn't that undercut? I'm not sure what point that addresses.
Well, I'm saying if we turned Pfizer instead of Pfizer, if we did, Cartagena, drug cartel LLC, and brought them into the fold, paid them billions of dollars, and made them an oligopoly, then you could probably significantly reduce the violence because the bosses and the employees are getting paid.
I agree,
wages.
but the reason why that doesn't happen is because the production and manufacture and distribution is illegal and heavily policed.
Sure. Yeah.
So you're proposing legalizing
Yeah,
drugs, at least to an extent.
on a broader scale, I don't want to do supply, or I don't want to do demand side legalization. I want to do supply side legalization with very strict controls. And I want to make very violent and scary people very rich and docile and happy.
I'm okay with that. I mean, the only
Yeah.
reason there's supply side restrictions now is because of American power that manages to convince the rest of the world to criminalize the production and distribution of these drugs.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of the thing is like American empire is what we make it. So at this point, the boomer generation, I hate to say it because I love my parents dearly, but the boomer generation is dying out, and Gen X is a very small generation, which kind of leaves it to the millennials. And unfortunately, we don't know our ass from our elbow, but we're doing our best. And so I'm hoping that politics in the next century is a lot more flexible than it is right now.
Okay. It would take a lot of flexibility to reverse course on the drug war.
Well, I think there's a higher chance of me being shot with a heart attack gun by the CIA than my plan actually going through. So,
I we're in agreement with that.
yeah. So I don't have a lot of hopes for the Pan American Empire that legalizes drugs on the supply side in order to reduce demand side consumption. But I can dream, and also, Simone Bolivar. He's like, the founder of Colombia and like a very big dreamer who united South and Central Americans. I think that we could have this, but it would take a lot of people getting their shit together that currently don't have their shit together, and that's why I'm not hopeful for my plan. While I still think it's the right thing.
So the Connor Yassine Pact is primed to solve the drug war problem.
Listen, if you would have come on,
managed.
listen, I'm a civic nationalist, man. Like, I know plenty of people on the right wing are racist as fuck, and they're like, "Oh, Yassine, he's, his name sounds weird. I don't know where he's from. I don't trust that guy." But for me, what I've been saying since day one, and I'll continue to say is, I don't give a fuck where you're from. I don't give a fuck where your skin color is. If you think that America is cool, and this is where we might have some disagreement, but freedom of speech and freedom of conscience are awesome. I think they're fundamental to our society. I think the right to self-defense, meaning the right to keep and bear arms and use them up to and including against a tyrannical government, and then a limited government, meaning that the government follows its own rules as best it can. Those are the cornerstone foundations that I think is necessary for America to work. So anybody who believes in those three foundations, you're a fucking American to me, man. So that's kind of my prerequisites for Americanism.
And partly to explain why I cite economics, I got an economics degree from George Mason University, which is infamous for being a haven of anarchists and libertarians, and that generally maps with my own political affiliations. I call myself like an anarchist with libertarian tendencies, and I also worked at the ACLU, and I was drawn to them partly because of their commitment to free speech. That has since changed a little, but I don't know if we have time to get into that.
We actually might. The other guy that I was going to talk to is kind of dipping, so honestly, or hasn't responded.
Okay, cool.
So I would say if you wanted to hang out until the momentum dies, we're good to go.
That sounds good. I'm good for that. When it comes to I'm a free speech maximalist. I'm very, very much pro civilian ownership of firearms. My policy proposal would be any civilian is entitled to own any weapon that the government has under the identical conditions. That would be kind of like my minimum.
Oh no!
And I would invite I would invite anyone actually to challenge me on that, because I think a large part of the pushback that I get is elitist in nature. When it comes to, I guess, what you've outlined is something I generally agree with. And I used to see conservatives as fellow travelers when it comes to skepticism about power, especially centralized power. For me, that has shifted significantly. The breaking point, like the final breaking point for me, was the 2020 election. And this is a topic that I've written about a lot. The allegations about election fraud. I just kept thinking, holy shit, these people are completely off their rockers.
Or
And
they don't
it was
care,
this,
which is worse.
yeah, I think it's debatable which one is worse. But that was extremely dispiriting for me because I just felt unmoored. As someone that has libertarian proclivities, I was meant to be isolated from the beginning. But when in these situations, I'm like, who am I supposed to like ally with? Who am I supposed to turn to? I
Centrist.
feel completely untethered.
Come here, brother. I'll hug you through the fucking webcam. So,
All right, here we go.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
No, so I'm joking and I'm serious. Like what I'm really looking for, like I said, so those are the three principles I care about, and then everything else is window dressing. It's what we can argue for. My main falling out with libertarianism actually comes from my explorations of like fascist philosophy. So there's a lot of dissident right-wing, far right-wing people on the internet. They're kind of popular because they're extreme. And because of that, you have to contend with their ideas, or you can just call them Nazis and they'll disappear into their little corner. But that's not how I operate. I want to understand why people believe what they believe. And one of the things that I bumped into, which was an argument from the dissident right and the far right, was that the world will not allow you to be a libertarian or an anarchist. It just won't. There are governments and structures and power structures and all that kind of stuff that just exist, and they are going to impose themselves upon you throughout the entirety of your life, and you will probably die with a state with a hand in your pocket and a gun in your face. So your options are mold the power structure into your vision of the world or be stomped by it. And those are the only real two options. Now, I know that's an extreme perspective, but that kind of did solidify statism for me, because right now I see the state apparatus as being yanked on by the far left and the far right, and I don't want either one of those fucking cunts to be in control. I'm very worried about them being in control. So if there isn't a militant middle that like stands up and tells both of these parties to fuck themselves, I think we're kind of screwed, and we're careening towards at least a cultural civil war, if not like a low-scale conflict over the next couple of decades.
So at least that feels like grounded cynicism in terms of what you're able to do. I agree that if you have an idealist political vision, you're limited in terms of what tools are in your repertoire in order to actually effectuate that. That doesn't necessarily make me hopeless, though. Generally, despite, I guess, my dour overview about a lot of things, I tend to still remain an optimist. And that's based in part because of historical trends where the world is generally getting better. There may be like fits and starts, but it's generally improving in terms of the society that I want to have. I definitely would rather live today than 100 years ago, and so forth.
Well, I think that the world that we live in today is largely a product of like 1990s liberalism, which is, the Power Ranger, colorblind, everybody can be anything, you can be an astronaut if you put your, foot into it kind of mentality. And I just don't, I think a lot of people are growing up and they're realizing that's not true. What's going on is the economic opportunities that we were kind of promised, like, oh, put your heart into it and you'll become an astronaut. That's not true. And then same thing with basically like the racial thing. What's happened, unfortunately, because of, call them woke progressives, call them whatever you want, is a recentering of race. But I think of, instead of getting like a more progressive and tolerant society that's good for everyone, I think what we're actually getting, unfortunately, is race as a category through which to analyze the world again. And I think that's going to have disastrous...
Did you say analyze the word?
Anal?
The world?
Analyzed, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Listen. I'm a liberal or a libertarian or a Republican, depending on how you argue it. So yeah, we tolerate degeneracy here. So analyze.
Okay. Sorry for interrupting you.
That's fine. So but the point being that, like, I think that white folks are fucking sick of getting called privileged and this, that, the other. And you can make strong academic arguments for privilege. You could say Kobe Bryant and I, Rip, LeBron James and I are fucking walking down the street, and he's a billionaire or a millionaire, and I'm a fucking white dude, and somebody yells the N-word at both of us. Who is it going to affect more? Him, because he's fucking black, and he's got that history and all that bullshit in the back of his head. Somebody calls me the N-word, I'm gonna keep walking because I don't give a fuck. That, you know, even if you call me cracker or honky, if you look like a crazy person, I'll keep walking. I don't give a fuck. So that's white privilege. But are there a host of other privileges, like being a fucking multi-millionaire who plays a sport for a fucking living, that kind of trump the race card? And I think a lot of white people are saying, like, hey, bro, you're talking shit to me like I'm fucking Hitler or I'm like some Confederate plantation owner, and I'm like a middle-class Joe who's working 50 hours a week in order to be $100 behind on my fucking bills. Fuck you for bringing up race into this shit in the first place. And so that's where I'm worried that whatever cultural path we're down on right now is actually re-energizing some of the shit that we wish we'd killed 30 years ago.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. One of the pieces that I wrote for Single was a review of a book by David Bernstein called Classified, which gets into a history of racial classification in the United States. So I'm from Morocco. I'm an Arab, but according to the U.S. government, I'm white because the U.S.
Well, you're
government
Mediterranean.
considers.
Let's be real.
No, the official federal government considers Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East up to the border, the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, to be all white.
No fucking way.
That's the classification.
Welcome
So
to the
everyone,
white race, bud.
yeah, like think about it. Like an Afghan refugee comes in here, manages to escape Afghanistan, comes in, tries to settle in the United States. They get an application in terms of what is your race. They have to put white. They're gonna answer it right.
Based. Dude, there's this fucking meme that I posted. It's from Elliot Rodger, formerly what was their fucking name? Elliot Page, excuse me. Elliot Rodger's the fucking serial killer. So formerly Ellen Page, now Elliot Page, and it's like, hey, Elliot Page, you know, when they show up for fucking wing and beer night, and it's like, Elliot Page, welcome to the better gender, and they're giving them a fucking high five and shit, and like that's kind of how I feel too about the shit. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
My fucking camera keeps knocking out randomly. But that's how I feel about like Americanism or American nationalism or the civic nationalism that I was talking about. Is like the more the fucking merrier, as long as we have these foundational beliefs. But if you don't have these foundational beliefs, then fuck you. And that's actually the weird thing, is I could be very easily allied with a Moroccan libertarian who got an economics degree, who works as an ADA and has chill views about drugs.
Stop saying I'm an ADA. I'm a public defender.
Oh, sorry, excuse me. So is an ADA technically below you?
No, an ADA is usually refers to a district attorney, which in the parlance refers to a prosecutor.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So I think the only reason why I keep saying that is because whenever I had to talk to a lawyer, it was an assistant district attorney. So it was.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess that's the prosecution side. God damn my fucking camera. I'm working on it. And then one of the dudes.
One thing I learned is that in the UK,
minutes, but I'm still.
What was that?
One of the guy DM'd me, so I got to jump in about 5 to 10 minutes. But I was gonna say we can run the clock while it's hot.
Okay, that sounds good. The focus on race is definitely myopic for the same reasons that you outlined. There's a whole host of factors that one should consider when determining how much benefit or privilege someone enjoys. So I'm an Arab immigrant. On paper, I'm supposed to be disadvantaged, but I'm also an attorney. I'm 6'2". Like, there's so many factors that help me benefit from like whatever preconceived notions people have. I don't have the same fear about law enforcement that other people would have, especially like my white clients who get harassed by cops all the time, even though they're white. Like that doesn't protect them.
Isn't there like a classism thing too there? That's the other thing too, is I get like the whole white privilege thing. I really do. Like I've hung out with lefties long enough to fucking get it. But at the same time, for me, it's like that doesn't protect a motherfucker from Appalachia. You know, that doesn't protect somebody who grew up in a fucking trailer park and has as antagonistic views against law enforcement as any, urban youth, black or Hispanic gentleman. So that's kind of my
Yeah.
frustration is just like you were saying that this myopia, like the intersectionality is supposed to be an analysis of multiple variables. It's not supposed to be using a single variable to analyze the entire world for perpetuity. And I guess that's what really fucking pisses me off is like academics can get it, but the people on the street are fucking assholes and should basically stop talking about it.
No, this feels like a point that's too obvious to even bring up. So I wrote about this in the review of Classified, but I talk about how the programs that try to benefit minorities, they've been completely subsumed by basically privileged minorities that have taken over the entire like apparatus. So there's this idea that you want the original text like that Congress passed, and I'm simplifying a great deal, but the original text that Congress passed is that socially and economically disadvantaged groups should get a boost to correct previous discrimination. They never said anything about race, and I'm talking about the Small Business Administration, Department of Transportation. Those are the biggest set aside. They never said anything about race, but as a way to, I guess, simplify matters to make it more streamlined, the agencies are in charge of administrating all this. They said, we're just going to presume that you're disadvantaged if you tell us that you're of a particular race. And you get this just idiotic scenarios where a blonde woman from Spain qualifies as Hispanic, even though she like looks white. Yeah,
dude, I'm about to start checking Hispanic on fucking everything. You don't know whether or not I'm Hispanic. My name's Irish as fuck, but you don't know.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself, how do people even enforce this? And for a long time, the regulation that the agencies gave to people, to employers specifically, is that employers were supposed to fill it out on behalf of their employees based off what they perceived. So an employer is supposed to look at you and be like, you kind of look black, maybe. So I'm gonna check
the
black.
HR department is about to fucking get in mad trouble for that shit because, like you said, you got a gentleman from the Middle East and North Africa or whatever, but they're past that certain line. And then you fucking check the wrong box, and it's like, well, you just fucked up their potential for employment or benefits or whatever the fuck. So
they changed it to self-ID, I think, in like 2007.
Well, that's great.
But that introduces
I identify
a
as
host
an
of
Irish
issues.
guy who came to America through Mexico and not through fucking Boston. So
my favorite example was this businessman that he took a genetic test and found out that he had like 1/32 South African or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so when he applied for funding with his state agency, he checked that he was black, and,
and he got
they couldn't really do anything because like it kind of ties into gender identity. It's like how do you even like counter that point? What are you supposed to say? You're not really black, because then you're accused of being a gatekeeper. I mean, he also did some hilarious thing. Like he said, well, I got a subscription to Ebony magazine and I also joined the NAACP.
Oh, I'm going to bring this on. It's like when you watch black porn one time and it's like this like super white guy. Hold on. I got to see if it's only horrific things came up on my Google search. So there's this fucking dude who looks as white as me, but like it's like when you watch porn with like black girls in it or something like that, and then they fucking edge his hair like in like the perfect like fucking African American fucking haircut. I gotta find that meme, but yeah, like that's the. All right, I'm perfectly okay with redressing social grievances. I'm okay with being intelligent about this stuff. I'm okay with saying that because my grandparents were able to capitalize on the GI Bill and able to get decent degrees and therefore able to buy houses on the right side of town and put their kids through good schools, compared to a black veteran from World War II, that might not happen as much. I'm perfectly okay saying that. But then my goal would be, let's not fucking whinge about the past. Let's make sure everybody actually has equality of opportunity and move forward. Whereas what it seems like a lot of leftoids do, and not trying to dog any of the leftoids in my audience, but like it seems like you gotta apologize for the past. You gotta pay for the sins of your grandpa. You gotta fucking walk through town square with a whip on your back, and nobody's gonna fucking do that shit. Like eventually. I hate to say it, but eventually white people are going to be like, fuck you. And they're probably going to make, it's crazy to think about, they're probably going to make a conservative alliance with Middle Eastern and North African conservative immigrants and Hispanic conservative immigrants. and then they're going to roll back like liberal social progress about 50 fucking years, because that coalition, if you get over racial disparities, Hispanic conservatives, black conservatives, white conservatives, and Middle Eastern and North African conservatives, they share more in common against the left than they do when they hate each other. So if Christians, learn to fucking talk to their Middle Eastern and North African Muslim fucking neighbor, that could be a problem for the left going forward.
I think perhaps in general, white people are, especially white liberals, are too timid to do anything. So if I foresee any pushback, it would be from the groups that things like affirmative action is supposed to help but doesn't help. So there's currently a divide, for example, between American descendants of slaves and Nigerian immigrants. So you get like a Nigerian immigrant whose mom is like a doctor and her dad is an accountant, and she just like gets preferential treatment at Harvard. And someone that actually suffered like a lineage and heritage of oppression because of American slavery, they're like, bro, what the fuck? Like, and I actually
the
think
Nigerian bro's just like,
yeah. And I don't support affirmative action, but I think that concern is valid because if you're going to have a point to the program, it should at least target who you're trying to actually help. But we have this very bizarre, like one size fits all way to address it that is easily gamed, and there's no like real defense against it.
That's the American way, man. It's the like kind of like what we were talking about with the drug war, whatever. I hate to say this, I don't think it's fully analogous, but we rig it such a way so the right people get where they need to go, and the people that don't get where they need to go, nobody gives a fuck about. Which, unfortunately, for higher academia, is Asians. Because everybody's like, "Oh, Asians, you're doing so well, anyways.
Yeah.
Who gives a fuck about you? You'll land on your feet." So
yeah, they're honorary white people.
Yeah, they are, dude. But they're doing better than white people in some cases. So
of course.
Yeah. So
but like the framework has no way of dealing with it. So you just get people twisted up into knots. So it's like like they're POC, but not really. But they're more like white. They're advancing white supremacy.
That's why I want to make everybody
incoherence.
White. This is why I want to make everybody white. So there was this fucking meme. There was this meme on Twitter. It was a black guy who was fucking pissed off because a professional baseball player married a white lady, and then his like half black son married another white lady. So the baby came out looking white as fuck. And like all the jokes in the Twitter things are like, oh man, she's going to have to be pulling up like family photos in order to say the N-word at the barbecue and shit. Like that's like all of the fucking like all the tweets. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize like, the big fear from all of the fucking race realists or whatever is that what's going to happen is the white race is going to be blotted out. But technically, if we were really, really smart about it, which, white people are supposed to be really smart about it, we could make everybody white. We just got to be smart about it. You know what I'm saying? Just like every generation, just, marry another lighter skinned person. We can make everybody white in a few generations.
Yeah. This was something. How are we on time, by the way?
Yeah, I probably got to dip in order to go talk to that guy.
Okay, cool. Well, this was fun. Hopefully your audience enjoyed some of it.
I know they will. And not only that, this was super fun for me. And I'm always looking for smart folk who know what they're talking about, who like to have interesting conversations, and who have something to offer the world. And I feel like I got that tonight. It was awesome. Hazard was right to put us together.
Yeah. Fucking win.
All right. Appreciate you, buddy. And I'll DM you later, and maybe we can set up another one in a couple of weeks or a couple of months.
Yeah, that sounds fun. Take care, man.
Catch you, brother.